I understand why you're angry, and believe me, I would love for someone else to rule, but it can't be you. You're just the worst.
Good morning from the Bat Cave. It is, I think it's Friday, maybe it's Thursday. It's Friday, September 22, 2023. And I am getting toward the end of my my chapter I'm writing on the Reformation, and still doing a little bit more on the sneaky Calvinists. They were calling them sneaky Calvinists back then. They were literally trying to sneak into Lutheran churches and other churches, flat out lie about what they believed, and then get their pastoral positions, and then start slowly changing the doctrine towards Calvinism. They were always doing that. I'm probably going to do a whole other video on sneaky Calvinists just to make that point clear. But this one is just on just what a colossal tool Luther was, and what an awful theologian he was, and what a definite arch heretic he was. He was the worst, okay? The worst, okay? Now, if you need to get this context. You need to understand what went down in England before Luther got there, because all Luther is doing, he has had his whole life to study the Reformations of he has had his whole life to study the Reformations in of the Lollards and the Reformations of the Hussites. And the Hussites, remember, by Luther's day, the Hussites, who are right here, this is Bohemia and Moravia, okay? Luther's going to be right over here. Bohemia and Moravia have been free from Rome for 100 years. Rome has tried to raise a crusade against them twice. Remember, John Huss was inspired by John Wycliffe, and the Lollards were inspired by John Wycliffe, and the Lollards have had hundreds of trials in England. Dozens of them have been burned at the stake. They're still going, okay? So your propagandists who want to make you think that, like, Luther was this monk and Luther was, like, all alone and everybody was in darkness, and then all of a sudden this guy just, like, I'm going to nail the 95 Theses to the wall and get the Reformation started. This bullcrap propaganda, that the only reason you hear this in America is because the Calvinists have been propagandizing America from its beginning to make it sound like the Reformation was what gave you Lutheranism and Calvinism and nothing else. Okay? They're going to say the Reformation gave you theological Lutheranism and Calvinism as the reason for their Reformation, and then England's was just political, but eventually it got Calvinized, so they fixed it. Okay? Now, the proof is in the pudding. How is the church doing in any of those countries? What's the church like in Germany? Dead. What's the church like in Scandinavia? Dead as a doornail. What's the church like in Holland? Leading the world in legalizing drugs and drugs and prostitution. How is it doing in Scotland? Dead. How is it doing in England? Dead. How is it doing every single place the Reformation went? Dead, 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 dead. Dead as a doornail, dead. None of them are doing good. Well, what happened? Oh, did all the Christians come here? No. The Amish came here. The Amish came here, and the Mennonites came here because they're persecuting the crap out of them all over Germany. The Quakers came here because they were being persecuted. And then the Puritans came here because after they overthrew England, and then England was like, screw this, and started pushing back, a lot of the Puritans came here because they literally overthrew England. They overthrew England, they killed their king, started basically raping and pillaging through Ireland because they were Catholics. And if you weren't conforming to Catholicism, you were toast. And that's where the Baptist Calvinists came from. It was just Baptists who added Calvinism because they knew the writing was on the wall and they were going to kill them if they didn't. Okay? So that's what you have here. Luther's this is not reality, okay? In fact, most people are saying he never did this nailing the thesis to the wall. Most people are saying it never happened. They had the Gutenberg printing press at this time. You want to get something heard, you'd start printing press the crap out of that stuff. Yes, and Gutenberg was in Germany, so that's what you'd do. The Gutenberg printing press had been around for like 60, 70 years before Luther got here. So anyone who was trying to spread their ideas, they would spread them via the printing press and start handing out flyers everywhere. Well, Luther did that, okay? He had people working for him. You got to remember, he was like the head of the, he was basically like the head of the university where he was. Okay, so he's a monk for the Augustinian order. He's the attack dog for the Augustinians against the German scholastics. Okay, the German scholastics, or I'm sorry, the scholastics in general, these Catholic scholastics were better reformers than Luther and Calvin were. Okay, these guys had been reading Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, and I started digging into Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica. And they were starting to, Thomas Aquinas back in the 1300s was starting to speak out against forced baptism of the infants of Jews, which, guess what that's going to lead to? His argumentation for why you shouldn't force baptize the infants of the Jews is because they're not coming to faith with their reason. In other words, you're telling them they're Christians without them actually believing it. He was planting seeds, whether he knew it or not, for getting rid of infant baptism. That was Thomas Aquinas. And because he believed in Aristotle, he started pushing back against all the determinism of Augustine. Like he critiques Augustine a lot in Summa Theologica. And he starts to say, I think, because he's reading Aristotle, and Aristotle's all about, rationalism and looking at what's in front of us. And that's actually closer to biblical faith, because biblical faith says God makes himself known through the things he's made. So that's what Aristotelianism is all about, is like trying to figure out everything. That the difference where Aristotle gets off on a bad path is where he thinks you can then figure out things about God. Not just that God is, but figure out what God's like through study of things, okay? So that's where you want to get off with Aristotle. But when it comes to these ideas of just like, yes, God gave you free will and he gave you a sense of a rational faculty to figure things out, that he is intending for you to find him, okay? He designed you intending for you to find him. Well, Luther hates that. And it's springing up all over Europe by Luther's day. So you have the Lollards and the Hussites are turning people against Roman Catholicism, against indulgences for 100 years before Luther gets there. Okay? Luther did not turn Europe against indulgences. This is such a joke. So for 100 years, these guys are turning Luther's world against indulgences. If Luther wants to attack the Pope on indulgences, it is the safest thing he can say, which is why it's the only thing he says against the Pope. Okay? Now, everything he's going to say, people have been attacking the Pope for hundreds of years. Ever since the Crusades, ever since they quit on the Crusades, people have been attacking the popes, because the Pope basically is like, well, we failed in Jerusalem and Syria and Egypt and all that stuff. So, which were all originally Christian, we failed. And so what they're going to do is they're going to focus on setting the Holy Roman Emperor and the French and the English and all these different lords to fight back and forth against each other and manipulate the crap out of them, and always claiming that it's a holy war and sending Christians to fight other Christians all the time. They're constantly doing this. And so the Pope is getting super unpopular. So Luther is not doing anything brave. He is not doing anything novel. He is not doing anything theologically brilliant. In fact, if you get his theology, and you can get this, just look up Luther's theology and order. And it's going to tell you the order of the stuff that he publishes. And right here in 1517, there's his 95 thesis, okay? So this is the stuff that made print. Okay, now Luther was teaching, and he would have been doing all kinds of lectures on all kinds of scriptures, but this is what he chose to publish, okay? So his first publication work in 1513, 1515, he is publishing lectures on the Psalms. That's not going to be relevant. Then he's going to publish lectures on Romans. And when he publishes lectures on Romans, he is going to pour Augustine into Romans, okay? And so he's going to look at things. All your bad translations of Romans, they all came from Augustine. The idea where Romans 7, Luther is going to admit in his own commentary on Romans that when he reads Romans 7, it sounds like they're talking about an unregenerate person before they're saved, but he is going to submit to what other theologians believe, including Augustine, largely, that it's talking about someone who's saved. It's talking about Paul himself as a born-again Christian, okay? Now, Romans 7 is not talking about Paul as a born-again Christian. Are there elements of that that can still apply to a born-again Christian? Yes. But he's literally talking about the difference between somebody in bondage to the law, and then in chapter 8, he's going to compare that to somebody who's free in the Spirit, okay? So he's gonna assert that. He is going to go to Romans 10 and start, or Romans 8 and start talking about predestination. He is going to completely ignore the word foreknowledge and act like that's just not even there. And he's just going to skip that part and just start talking about predestination. Okay? He's going to go to Romans 9 and he's going to put all his bad Calvinistic readings about the Jews in there, or I'm sorry, about the free will and about God choosing who he's going to love and who he's going to hate before anyone's born. So all that stuff's going to be in there. So this is some of his first publication work. Now this is 1515. He puts his 1995 thesis on the wall 2 years later. I don't know if you guys understand how long it takes to write and print a book, but that means Luther was working hardcore on this, and he had people working hardcore on this. You don't just like, oh, blah, 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 I'm just going to, print. Like, his commentary on Romans is hundreds of pages. I mean, here it is right here. It's 500 pages. Do you know what it takes to print and distribute 500 pages? I mean, I'm up to like 200 pages, and it's taken me almost a year with the technology that we have today. I've been at this since January. Luther just became a monk 10 years before this, okay? So 10 years before he becomes a monk, he is spending his life poring over Augustine's works, okay? He is studying a ton, but it's all based around Augustine because he's an Augustinian monk. He never stops being an Augustinian monk, okay? So when you see his first publication work is his treatise on Romans, what is he doing? And the answer is very easy because it's in all his writings. You're going to hear it over and over again. He is attacking scholasticism. He is attacking Aristotle. He is attacking Thomas Aquinas. He is attacking Diodorus Erasmus. He is attacking the scholastics. And the scholastics are the people who are trying to reform Roman Catholicism from within. Now, what your false, lying, Protestant, Calvinist, Reformed propagandists are going to tell you is that Luther was trying to reform Catholicism from within. That's a lie. Luther was attacking that movement, okay? What Luther was basically saying is the only pure Christianity is Augustinian Christianity, and he's going to go so far beyond Augustine, and he is going to claim that we never had a free will except to sin. That's what Luther taught. Luther is going to teach that free will is sin, and the whole point is to give up your free will. That's the whole point, because all you can do with your free will is sin. Okay? He literally equates free will with thinking thoughts that didn't come from God, and so therefore they're evil. Okay? And then he's going to say that Adam was like this from his original creation. Okay? That's why Luther gets called a heretic. Now listen to this. Before you get to this, so remember I said his lectures on Romans is where he's starting to put the good and proper Augustinian understanding of Romans out. And then his next writing is going to be the disputation against scholastic theology. And that's where he's going to attack scholastic theology right out. And one of the things that he's going to say in here is that God cannot accept a wicked person. And so he's going to view wickedness as a nature rather than a state of mind. Like, in other words, are you walking in opposition to God or are you repentant? Okay? He's going to say, no, it's all, he's fully Augustinian. And so wickedness has to do with your substance, whether you're spiritually clean or unclean. And so he's going to say that God can't accept you on the basis of faith. he needs to regenerate you before he can accept you. Okay? He's going to say, first he can only accept you after he's applied his sanctifying grace, and that means regenerate you. Now, he's not going to speak in terms of regeneration preceding faith yet. The Calvinists are going to start doing that, but they're getting it from him. Okay? And they're saying that God must regenerate you and make you righteous before he can account you righteous. So he just erases the whole idea of righteousness by faith. He erases it. He says, no, it's righteousness by righteousness, and faith is just a byproduct. Okay? This is what he's saying. God makes you righteous, and then he accepts you because he's made you righteous. Okay? He erases justification by faith alone. He's not going to tell you that, because he's going to say, well, yeah, it's justification by faith alone. The faith that God gives you after he regenerates you. That's where he's going, okay? Then he's going to post his 95 Theses, because what he's doing is he's attacking on Luther's on attack mode all the time, which is why at the end of his life, when he's won and he's got everything he wants, he's run out of people to... He's like, oh, there's no more lands to conquer. I'm Alexander the Great. I must cry. And then he's like, wait a minute. Here's some Jews over here. Now I can attack them. Because this is what these fools do. It's like they need to attack everybody. They need to find somebody new to attack because they've got nothing to do. They've got nothing to do. Okay? They don't ever go out and evangelize. They're not discipling anybody. They never have. Never have. Okay? These people's idea of reformation and revival is taking people who have faith, convincing them they're wrong, and then sucking them into their cult. That's what they think revival is. That's what they think conversion is, because this goes all the way back to Origen and Clement, who started teaching that conversion is like switching from one philosophy school to another philosophy school. And it's all about debate, and it's all about your philosophy school winning, like your sensei's better than their sensei because he beat them up in the street. Okay? That's what these guys do. And so Luther is always looking for an attack dog. And 95 Thesis is about attacking Rome, while he's attacking the Roman Catholic scholastics as well, who are trying to reform Rome. So I haven't found his lectures on Hebrews, so if somebody can point me to a link to get that, pop it in the description, or pop it in the comment section, because I want to look at that a little bit. But then he's going to publish his Heidelberg Disputation. So notice the dates on these. He publishes his 95 Theses in October of 31. By April of 1518, that's 6 months later, he's doing his Heidelberg Disputation. Now, when I was at a Baptist church, we read this book called The Theology of the Cross that was based on the Heidelberg Disputation. And I'm reading this, and I'm getting irate as I'm reading this, because I'm just sitting here going, he's telling you that you can only sin with your free will. And they're like, well, yeah, because of the fall. And I'm like, no. He's saying it was always like that. And then I find this. So notice this is April of 25. 2 months later, he publishes the preface to this book called German Theology, okay? So he didn't write this book. He published a preface to the book, which means he's making a print edition of this book where he puts the preface in it, and it's somebody else's book. Now, we don't know exactly who wrote this book, but this was a Latin publication called Theologica Germanica, which apparently he's going to put in German. And you can read this book online at Christian Classics Ethereal Library, Theological Germanica, and you want to read this, and here's why. Because Luther says about this book that no book, nothing outside of the Bible and Augustine, has influenced him more than this book. And why is that important? Because this fool in this book is going to say that God created free will to be his enemy. And he is going to say that he created Adam fallen from the beginning. He gave Adam a free will. And the moment Adam exercised that free will, he sinned. And so he is going to claim that Adam basically is this. He is a robot bent on evil from the beginning. When God takes him over, in other words, when God puts his hand up the butt of that sock puppet, he does good. But when God takes his hand out and that sock puppet tries to be a real boy and do anything on his own, the only thing he can do is sin. That's how he's describing original creation, okay? So what he is saying very clearly is that Adam was fallen from the beginning. And Luther, in his Heidelberg Disputation, remember, this is just 2 months away before this, Luther's going to publish it, okay? In his Heidelberg Disputation, he is going to argue that Adam could do nothing but sin with his free will. He's going to argue that because of the fall, free will exists in name only. And then he's going to argue that once we're born again and filled with the Holy Spirit and empowered by God, we still do nothing but sin. Everything we do is evil. And we need to count everything that we do as a mortal sin, like murder, okay? So in other words, our good deeds, we need to look at our good deeds like we're murdering someone, okay? So Jesus says, do good deeds and let your good deeds be seen before men. Luther says, no. Do good deeds, but think of yourself as murdering people. Why? Because you can't do anything, even as a born-again Christian, even when you're led by the Spirit, even when you're empowered by God, even when He's working to will and do His good pleasure in you, you still have to think of it as a mortal sin like murder or adultery. And if you think of it as a mortal sin, then it will only count as a venial sin, which basically means that, well, that's the kind of sin that if you repent, Jesus has forgiven you for by the blood of His atonement. You don't have to go to purgatory and work that off. You don't have to go to penance to work that off, okay? But your mortal sins, when you have your mortal sins, those are the things that they make you shame yourself and humiliate yourself and possibly die for, okay? And maybe you'll go to heaven, but we're going to burn you at the stake, or we're going to beat you bloody to death and expiate you to atone for your sins because you've committed a mortal sin, and Jesus' blood just doesn't cover those sins. This is how Luther is thinking about everything you do, okay? You must think of everything you're doing as pure evil. And if you think of it as pure evil, well, then it's only bad enough that that Jesus' blood can atone for your sins, okay? But if you think you're doing anything good, that is, let's say God told you, hey, why don't you go give that homeless person a slice of your pizza? That was nice of you. And God's saying, thank you, my son, that is pleasing. That glorifies me. Doesn't that feel good? Yeah. Doesn't that edify that person? Yeah. But now go share the gospel with them. Tell them that Jesus loves them and He died for his sins. And you go do all that. And Luther's saying, once you're done doing that, you better think all I did was a mortal sin. And maybe God did some good in me, but it was tainted by my sinfulness. And you have to think about it like that. Otherwise, you're going to incur the wrath of God. Luther's whole world was about, he literally is saying, you need to hate yourself to love God. You need to hate yourself to love God. And for those of you who think he means by hate, love less, he doesn't. He means hate. He means actual hate. He means you need to loathe yourself. You need to look at yourself. Paul's line that says, I know in me, that is in my flesh, dwells no good thing. He's not talking about your flesh. He's talking about your whole person, your soul, your everything. It dwells no good thing, even after you're born again. Okay? Even though Paul is really specific, and he says that is in my flesh, so I can say in my flesh dwells no good thing, but in my soul dwells the righteousness of Christ. Nope, you can't think like that. You have to think, I'm wicked, I'm evil, because he believes you can lose your salvation too. And he believes you can lose your salvation if you don't constantly think of yourself as a sinful, wicked creature. Which is why your Baptists who are going to, your modern Baptists who are going to be dragged into the Protestant Reformation by the Reformers to think that they're part of the Protestant Reformation, which they're not, but they're going to be taught that we're just sinners saved by grace. And they're always talking about themselves as sinners. They're always talking about themselves as if almost like they're still in bondage to sin. And that's why you're going to have a lot of Baptists. They're going to keep sinning, and then they're going to rededicate their life to Christ later because that's all they can do with their free will is sin. Okay? Now, Baptists aren't known to be as systematic about how they think like that, like Calvinists and Lutherans are. but that influence has seeped into the Baptist church, okay? Which is why you're going to have a lot of Baptists with it that are less joyful, okay? Not saying that there's a lot of good Baptists out there, so don't take, when I say I post something on Facebook and it says Baptist, and everyone who's a Baptist needs to find some reason why I'm not attacking them directly, okay? I'm talking about what Baptists tend to preach and think about in their churches and the books they pass around, because this is where I got this book, is from a Baptist church. So this is why when you don't associate yourself with a denominational label, and you won't get butthurt when somebody starts speaking critically about that denominational label. Remember, those denominational labels represent thought systems, okay? Not people. What makes you a Baptist is not that you go to a Baptist church. What makes you a Baptist is your standing under Baptist theological premises. What makes you a Calvinist is you standing under Calvinist theological premises. You can choose to go to a church where that pastor is a Calvinist, maybe even the church is Calvinist, and you go there for fellowship. You don't have to take the label Calvinist onto yourself. I've gone to Reformed Baptist churches. I've gone to Churches of Christ. I've gone to Baptist churches. I don't claim any of those things. But people who think in terms of denominational teams, they will associate with me with that. I've been called a Calvinist and Arminian in the same day. Literally called a Calvinist and an Arminian in the same day, because these people just think in terms of us and them. They think that those thought systems have to be all that you are, and you're either one of us or you're one of them. They don't know how to deal with a person who knows how to think about individual issues outside of the box and say, yeah, I agree with them on that thing, but I disagree with them on that other thing. I agree with Baptists on a lot of things. I disagree with Baptists on a lot of things too. I agree with Calvinists on some things. I don't agree with them on the foundational elements of their theology, nor Luther. I disagree with Luther on the foundational elements of theology. Now remember, Luther's theology amounts to this: grace equals fate. That's it. Grace equals fate. Now your modern Calvinists and Lutherans are not going to admit this, but that is, like, if you just read through Luther's writings and you just take out the word grace and you put in the word fate, it makes perfect sense. Because grace is unmerited favor, okay? But that's not how Luther sees it, and that's not how Augustine saw it. Now, Augustine was not systematic. He was just writing a bunch of bullcrap to attack anybody who criticized him, okay? Luther is trying to be systematic about it. And so Luther is going to look at the word grace, and he's going to see fate, okay? So he's going to say, we're saved by grace through faith. And he's going to say, we're saved by fate through faith. That's how he's going to see it when he reads the Bible. Because free will is the opposite of fate. Okay? Free will and fate are opposites. And what they're going to claim, there's two systems that exist in the Greek world. And they're not like cleanly represented in Plato versus Aristotle, but he's going to try to frame it that way. Okay? Plato and Aristotle were actually way more compatible than most people realize, but those systems are actually represented in Heraclitus and Parmenides, which is why I'm always talking about these two. And Parmenides is basically any systems derived from Parmenides are necessarily fatalistic, but systems derived from Heraclitus don't have to be. They can be, but they don't have to be, because they talk about the Logos as something that is undiscoverable, and we can't define the Logos. We lack the data to define the Logos, and so all we know is that the Logos is out there and we're interacting with it. But because we don't define what it is, we're not dictating reality according to those confines, and so therefore reality doesn't have to be defined as a stasis. Now that might be hard for a lot of you to understand, but when you say that God isn't it is, and this is what Parmenides is saying, you're saying God is like this and God doesn't change, okay? And so reality only conforms to what God is because God transcends reality. In other words, he surrounds it, and reality operates within the confines of God. Now, I believe that reality operates within the confines of God, but what I don't do is I don't define God outside of anything he reveals about himself. So I can sit here in the universe, and I can sit here going, well, can God change? I mean, well, let's find out. If you sin, how does that feel? I feel like crap. Yeah. So did you change God's disposition toward you? It looks like I did. And they're going to say, no, you can't change God. You only change you. No. God loves you. And if you turn back towards him, if you're one of his children, he is going to, his love is going to return to you. Okay? But if you don't, you're going to go to hell. Okay? Because his disposition is going to change according to your disposition. Now, his disposition is not an ontological change. That's not something we need to worry about. Okay? But because they see God as an it is, they see any change in God as a change in disposition. In other words, if God becomes angry because you sin, they're saying, well, God is an it is. God is a stasis. God can't change. And so he can't become angry. He just has to be angry. And what they're going to say is that God is love and God is wrath all at the same time, always, unchangingly like that. And that your disposition towards God is going to affect what side of God you see. That sounds really good, but what if God is just saying, no. They're going to say, well, because God is eternal, he's the it is, he can't change. And like, well, what if God is the same ontologically, but different dispositionally in relation to us? Because this disposition is like saying this position is different, right? So it's like the disposition of the Earth to the moon is like, well, the Earth doesn't move. Let's say the Earth doesn't move, and the moon just moves around it. And it's like, yeah, but in relation to the moon, the Earth has changed. Why? Because it's looking at the Europe now instead of America. So the Earth has changed. And the Earth is not moving. Well, we know in reality they're both moving. That's how gravity works, okay? And they say, well, the sun doesn't change. We go around the sun. The sun doesn't go around us. And it's like, well, the sun looks like it's changing to us. Well, yeah, but it's changing dispositionally to us. See, disposition is a relativity. Okay? Now, it's the same thing with good and evil in relation to God. God doesn't change his nature. Okay? So gravity keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And since God is infinite, he's the biggest source of gravity, okay? But with all things gravitationally, there's a relativity there, okay? Not because God is in space and there's a larger space-time sphere in which he's subject to, but there's a relativity there because his disposition changes towards us as we change our disposition toward him. If I turn on God in sin, God turns on me in wrath. And that dispositional change is real. It's not something that's like, well, but it happens in time. That's okay that it happens in time because time is in God. And so God interfaces with time in time. And it's okay for God to talk like that. He's not making something up that we need to then process as if we're looking over God's shoulder in a stasis. Okay? We don't need to do that. That's literally setting yourself above God and judging why God does the things he does. That's what you don't do. That is ideolatry, okay? I'm going to coin a new word for you guys. Ideolatry, okay? It's like idolatry, except it's up here instead of in your hands. Okay? You don't stand over God's shoulder and dictate why God does the things he does. You accept what God says about why he does the things he does. And if God says, if you, then I, you need to believe him. And if you can't reconcile that because you're saying, well, but God is outside of time. Yes, he's outside of time, except for when he's not. You need to think about that. Once God created space-time, he is also interfacing with space-time, okay? And he explains how he does this because he pours his spirit into space-time. So his spirit is always interacting with man, and his spirit has a disposition. That's why you can grieve the spirit. Think about that. And the spirit is God, so therefore you just changed God. You changed God's disposition. You didn't change God's nature. You didn't change his ontological being, but you did change his disposition. You grieved the Holy Spirit. Okay? Then he sends his son even more bound up in space-time, and we killed him. And he now has, listen to this, in heaven and in eternity, he has a different nature now. Christ changed ontologically. He has scars permanently. You think he started out with those? If he started out with those, why weren't they there? Would he hit them? Is he a docetic God who's just performing illusions on us? And the scars were already there because he was crucified before the foundations of the world? Did you know that Bible verse that says Christ was crucified before the foundation of the world is not translated properly? Did you know that book is talking about the Lamb's book of life that was written before the foundation of the world? But they call it the book of the life of the Lamb that was slain before the foundations of the world because it's the Lamb that was slain's book now? And they're saying the book of life was written before the foundation of the world, and it became the Lamb's book of life. It became the book of the Lamb that was slain when he died and purchased everyone in it. And so they're not saying Jesus was crucified from the foundations of the world. They're not saying that in the Bible. You got to remember, the guys who came up with those ideas, one, they translated the Bible poorly, and two, they thought the book of Revelation was a bunch of symbols and a bunch of obscure prophecies that weren't meant to tell you about what it was going to be like before Jesus came back, because they didn't believe that. They didn't believe that this was a prophecy about the future. They believed that it was a commentary on history and a bunch of just cryptic sayings. Okay? And so they started pulling theology out of it, but they missed the part about where Jesus said, whoever wills comes and drinks from the fountain of life. They negated that. And when you get to Luther, this turd bottom here is going to say, well, he's basically going to take Hebrews, which he doesn't understand because it talks about losing your salvation and it talks about the new covenant. He doesn't understand this. Luther is actually going to counsel Henry Tudor and tell him, well, under Mosaic law, you can have multiple wives. So, you don't need to get a divorce, just have a second wife. That's what Luther's going to counsel Henry Tudor. Why? Because Luther's under the law. He doesn't understand this. Okay? He doesn't understand Hebrews. That's why I want to read his commentary on Hebrews, because he doesn't like the book. He doesn't understand James, because James says you're justified by works plus your faith. And they're like, well, wait a minute. We're justified by faith alone. Yes, we're justified by faith alone to receive Christ. But we're justified also by our works to enter into eternal life. Okay? We're justified twice. We're saved twice. We're born again twice. We die twice. We're two people. We're the inner man and the outer man. That's why Paul can say, I know in me that is in my flesh dwells no good thing, right after saying, it is not me who sins, but sin that dwells in me. How can he say both of those things? The same way that Jesus was in the beginning with God and was God. There's a duality to Jesus. There's a duality to us. There's a duality to everything. Why? Because you're dealing with an eternal, unchanging being and a changing space-time. Both are reality. Both are reality. And they're not going to be one until God is done. See, God separated them from himself in order to create what we would call a sandbox in which we can learn to love, so that when he gives us eternal life, we don't spend eternity murdering each other, and God doesn't spend eternity resurrecting people. Because this sucks. Why? What are they doing? Well, that guy took those guys the last of the Cheetos, and that other guy just stabbed him to death, so I gotta resurrect that guy again. Whoop. There you go. That's a really shitty eternity. Think about that. You keep murdering people in your hearts. You keep wanting to murder God because that's what you want to do. Oh, look, God shows up as Jesus again. Stab him to death. Why? He'll come back. It's fine. Just stab him to death. We just keep getting more evil, but God just keeps taking away the consequences. That's what the world wants to do. The world wants to keep letting you be as evil as you can and just figure out how to, oh, don't worry, we came up with a pill that now you don't even have to tell the guy you want to do sodomite things to that you have AIDS, because we came up with a pill, and if you take this pill, it's going to get your AIDS transmission level down to such a level that you are legally okay to say, no, I don't have AIDS, when you definitely have AIDS. and you can have gay sex now. That's what the world is selling you. I watch Amazon Prime, and that's what pops up in my channels. Okay? That's what the world says, is just keep sinning, we'll take away the consequence. And they're trying to create an eternity where you can just keep sinning, and we're going to use knowledge to take away the consequences. That's the world. Okay? God doesn't want to do that. He wants you to be born again. He wants you to enter into eternal life in love with God and in love with people. So you don't want to murder them. You just don't want to. The thought doesn't cross your mind. Why would you do that? Well, it's okay because they can be resurrected and they'll live forever. No, it's not okay. It's fundamentally not okay. It's not a matter of the consequences. It's a matter of you and your heart. You can't live with God forever as an enemy of God. And that's why God is going to merge space-time and eternity into one thing. And everything else he's going to cast out into the outer darkness. It's all going to burn forever. You think Luther gets this? You think Luther was that deep? No, he wasn't. Luther was a straight-up Augustinian attack dog. Anything that speaks against Augustine, he's going to attack. That's all he knows what to do, because he's an Augustinian monk, and he's been getting those cookies fed to him. Right? He gets his doggy treat every time he attacks something that's Augustinian. And the head of his abbot goes, good job, Martin. Good job. Yeah, screw those scholastics. And that's what he's going to do, okay? And that's what half of your kids do, your Christian kids. And here's what happens in Germany. Once they, listen, the Lutherans and the Calvinists are going to fight too. Okay, because the Calvinists, the sneaky Calvinists, are going to try to infiltrate Lutheran churches and try to lie about what they think about the Eucharist to get those positions, and then they're going to come out and try to get Calvinism in. They're going to do this all over Europe. That's how they take over England. They come out with the Geneva Bible that just eisegetes, like, you can look at the Geneva Bible online and go look at the Geneva Bible. It is like 3 times as much commentary as it is Bible text. Okay? You guys really need to look at the Geneva Bible. This is a page of the Geneva Bible, okay? This is John. This little section in here is the text. All of this here is the commentary notes, okay? So the Calvinists in England are going to put forward that you guys need a better Bible than the Bibles that you've made in English in order to have an English vernacular translation. And this is a much better translation of Greek, because it's based on the latest, greatest, blah, 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 okay? That's their version of textual criticism. That's what they're going to say back then. But what they're really selling you is these non-stop notes on every verse that tells you what they really mean, okay? And you can get a copy of the Geneva Bible online. With footnotes online. And you can go verse through verse of it, and you can go read John 1. Well, that ain't it. The Reformed Reader, okay? And you can get this. And you can go right to, let's see, John 1, okay? And look at the text that Calvinists tend to proof text. And it could say, but as many as received him, to them he gave power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, okay? That's what the text says. But what did the note say? The Son being shut out by the majority of his people and acknowledged by a few regenerates. Those few by his strength and power. Okay? So notice he's being acknowledged by regenerates and receives them into that honor which is common to the children of God, that is, to be sons of God. What are they saying? They're saying those who get power to become sons of God are those who are already regenerated and are already children of God, and now they can become sons of God. So it distinguishes between children of God and sons of God, in saying you're a child of God when God regenerates you, and then you become a son of God, and that's more of an official acceptance. They're going to make up all this bull crap about how when God says, this is my son in whom I'm well pleased, God is officially declaring Jesus to be his son, even though he was always his son. But it was like an official adoption ceremony when God says, this is my son. It's not God telling you that this is the son of God. It's an adoption ceremony. Okay, and that's where adoptionism comes from. Okay, the idea that Jesus wasn't a son before that, and they're like, no, he was a son ontologically, but now God is acknowledging his sonship because it's an adoption ceremony that was common to Greeks or Romans or whatever BS mythology they're going to make up. Okay, so they're going to say you were already children of God, and now you're a son of God. What? As many as received him. See, they're going to say, yeah, those that received him are the regenerate, and he receives them. Wait. This is about people who received Jesus. God gave power to becoming sons of God. In other words, if you believe, you can become regenerate. And he's going to say, no, those who are regenerate, God receives them, and they're already children of God, and now they become sons of God. He condescended to give them his power to take them to be his children. Wait a minute. You just said they're already his children. This kind of commentary is on every single verse. It's nonstop eisegeting Calvinism. And the reason King James wrote a King James Bible is because he knows this. King James comes from a line of Catholics who the Calvinists are getting murdered in Scotland already. They're already doing this in his realm, okay? And so King James knows they're going to take verses that talk about how, like, Jezebel was killed or Athaliah was killed and his mom was killed as an idolater. They got her killed. And he's going to be like, I don't like this Bible because it sounds like it's justifying killing my mom. And then it's constantly talking about tyrants and how you can lie to a tyrant and how tyrants are evil and it's lawful to lie to them and stuff like that. And this is in this Bible. And so he wants this crap gone. They're saying, well, the reason we need this Bible is because the English translation is not as good as it should be. And he's like, fine, give me an English translation that doesn't have this crap in it. And that's where the King James is going to come from. That's the facts, you guys. That's the history. These guys were infiltrating, and as soon as they had the numbers, when they did this in Lutheranism, they infiltrated churches, and as soon as they had numbers, they started pushing out all the Lutherans from Lutheran Germany. When that was like the law of the land, Lutheranism is there, and they're systematically treating Lutheranism the same thing they're doing with Catholicism. When Catholicism was the law of the land, they didn't care. They will lie for the greater good. Okay, and they'll say, well, it's evil, but it's lawful. They're going to say this about the midwives who sin. And that's why you're going to hear sermons. I heard 2 sermons from 2 guys who came from the same church called Calvary Non-Denom, which was in fact Calvinist. And in 2 different churches, you have Rob Bell and Randy Heckman. These are Crossroads. This is in Grand Rapids, Michigan. This is Rob Bell in Mars Hill Church and Randy Heckman in Crossroads Community Church. Both, within a month, within the same month, taught a sermon about when it's okay to lie. Why were they doing that? These people get memos and stuff. They get memos and stuff from church meetings, and we're going to teach on this now. That's what they do. And that's how they convince you that this is what the Holy Spirit's talking about. That's why they all started talking about shutting down the churches before the government told you to shut down churches for COVID. They got memos. Your churches are not led by the Spirit. Half of these pastors print their sermons offline, read them, and then act like they wrote it. Okay? Your churches are not what they seem. You need to know your pastor. You need to know he's in the Word. You need to be talking to him. You need to be asking him tough questions, and he needs to be answering those tough questions. And if he's not, I promise you, he is a hireling. He is giving you some bullcrap, and he's saying that's his own material. It's called plagiarism. Now, I've had pastors get up. I had a pastor, this is a Calvinist pastor too, got up and gave a sermon about this missionary and about this guy who the people kept stealing his bananas or pineapples or whatever, and eventually he taught them that they were God's pineapples, and they stopped stealing them and became Christians. And he gave this sermon as if he heard it from the missionary himself. And then I went and found it online, the exact same sermon. Oh, that's called plagiarism, dude. Yeah, but it preaches well. Yeah, it's called lying, dude. Calvinists don't care about lying. They think it's for the greater good. If they can justify it as for the greater good, the glory of God, and the expansion of his kingdom, they will lie. They see themselves as inside Roman Catholic Europe, and they're the underground church. And while the rest of the underground church is getting burned alive and drowned by them for their sincere, conscientious beliefs that they won't deny, the Calvinists will just say, nope, I don't believe that. I believe what you believe. Until they have the numbers, and then they're going to start persecuting you. The Lutherans are just going to fight because they're Germans, and Germans love fighting, okay? But like the Calvinists are going to be the Calvinists. Listen, the Germans come from a warrior class, okay? The Calvinists come from a mercenary class. That's who the Swiss were. They were mercenaries. They had different loyalties. They changed their loyalties, and they were mercenaries. Why do you think? Why do you think what's his name, Prince, founded Blackwater? It's a mercenary company, okay? And he was a Calvinist. Because being mercenaries, listen, Thomas Cromwell was a mercenary. Oliver Cromwell was a mercenary. The Swiss Calvinists were mercenaries. That's why you have the Swiss Guard that guards the Roman Catholic Pope. Because they're mercenaries. And these mercenaries merged with the mercantilists of the Dutch, the Dutch usurers, and these mercenaries. And they became the American Calvinists. You need to know where these people come from. They haven't changed. That's their flesh. And when they start applying their flesh into their theologies, guess what mercenaries do? They change sides. That's why Machiavelli wrote a book that said, don't ever freaking trust a mercenary. Okay, go read Machiavelli's The Prince. Mercenaries are the worst. He's saying if you need mercenaries to hold up your crown and your kingdom is already fallen. It's already fallen because those mercenaries are eventually going to take over, or they're going to switch sides and side with your enemies. Why? Because they're just doing it for money. They're not fighting for anything that they believe in. They're fighting for money. And that was the culture that Calvinism emerged in. So you're going to have theological Germanica is going to make Luther's theology the worst. And the Calvinists are going to try to bridge that between that and the English Reformation. Why? Because the English Reformation is about freedom for freedom's sake. The German Reformation is not. The German is about might makes right. And that's why Nietzsche and Hitler are going to come out of that. Might makes right. Whoever has the power determines the faith. Okay? And that's the treaty that they're going to get signed after they get into a war with Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. They're going to fighting, and where they're going to close it, they're going to sign a peace, and it's going to be called the, I think it's the Peace of Augsburg. I could be wrong, though. It might be the Peace of Westphalia. I think it's the Peace of Augsburg. And this is going to be in the middle of the 16th century. Okay, so like 1550s, 1560s, something like that. And they're going to sign this peace. And this peace is going to say, okay, whoever is the lord of the land, basically all this is they're going away from the Holy Roman Emperor to a confederacy of German principalities who are free from the Holy Roman Emperor now. Okay? They don't have to do what they say. So what they're doing is they're shifting from an empire to a kind of parliamentary democracy. Okay? They're not going to call it that, but they are going to ally together against common causes, and they're still going to fight King Charles's enemies. So the Holy Roman Empire doesn't officially dissolve at this time. And they're going to say, but the princes of the land, in other words, this is the lord of this territory. So let's imagine these like states. Okay, the governor of Michigan gets to determine the whole religion of the state of Michigan, and the governor of Massachusetts gets to choose the whole religion for the state of Massachusetts. And so Germany is going to get legal authorization for two religions, and that's Lutheranism and that's Catholicism. And once they get that, they're done. The Lutherans are done. Why? Because it was all about German nationalism. And it was all about we're Germans, And the Holy Roman Empire was built on the backs of Germans, and we are not going to submit to the Pope anymore. That's all it was about. And the Swiss are going to copy this, but they don't have the power that the Germans have. They're not a bunch of strong feudal kingdoms, okay? They're not a bunch of people with hereditary lord status who are later going to band together and become fascist Germany, okay? The seeds of fascist Germany were always in it, okay? What the Swiss are going to be is sneaky, because they're mercenaries. They don't have state loyalties. They don't have loyalties, period. And so they're going to get together and they're going to have secret meetings. And in those secret meetings, they're going to talk about how they're going to roll out and propagandize and do this stuff. And this starts before Calvin gets there. This is going to start with Ulrich Zwingli. And that's where they betray the Anabaptists. What they're going to do is they're going to say, here's the plan. Okay, they have people trying to reform, people trying to get rid of infant baptism. They definitely, Zwingli's married now, and so he's like, let's get rid of this freaking priestly celibacy thing. And Lent, and we're going to get rid of all these idols and stuff like that. And the people who are following Zwingli, because his principle is, if the Bible doesn't teach it, we're not going to do it. His followers are literally going to be like, okay, so let's get rid of infant baptism, because that's definitely not in the Bible. And Zwingli is going to betray them because he's going to get together with these other people, and they know there's no way we can sell a Christian nationalism to these people while getting rid of infant baptism. There's no way, because that's going to believers' Christianity. We're not trying to sell believers' Christianity. We're trying to sell a version of what the Lutherans pulled off, which is Christian nationalism. Okay? And so we're trying to sell them a Christianity that allows them to be free from the Pope, but still allows the state and the church to work together and have power over all the little people. That's what they want. That's what they believe in. And so they betray the Anabaptists and start killing them immediately. Immediately. I mean, like in 1523, they're making this plan to roll out this one-year plan, and in 1524, they're killing Anabaptists. Okay? So they're killing Anabaptists along with Lutherans and along with Catholics. And eventually they're just going to be along with Presbyterians and Anglicans too. They're killing Anabaptists. Okay? But at the same time, what they're going to do is they're going to have their preachers start preaching against all these Catholic icons and Mary and the Eucharist and all this stuff. And the magistrates, who are still submitted to the Holy Roman Empire, technically, and still submitted to the Pope, technically, are going to keep threatening to punish these ministers. It's all a ruse. They've already planned that we're going to break away and make Switzerland great again, okay? And so these guys are going to say, after a year of doing it, we're going to make it look like you won us over because this is what all the people want. And then we're going to start getting rid of the icons and the statues and stuff like that. And that's how we're going to roll it out. And then after that, they start pressuring the other Catholics. Okay? They're going to start pressuring the other Catholics. And when the Catholics say no, they're going to start attacking them. First, they're going to start preaching in their cities. Then they're going to start declaring war on them. Then they're going to try to blockade them. And they're going to keep going until Zwingli gets himself killed. The pacifist Zwingli. He betrayed everything that he believed in to try to win, okay? And he died justly because he was a hypocrite, okay? Luther, he didn't really betray anything he believed in because he just believes nobody has a free will, so he doesn't really believe in anything. He's a nihilist. Think about this. If you think that the only thing you can do with your free will is sin, then you're a nihilist, dude. You don't believe in anything. You believe will is sin and denial of free will is not sin, but yet at the same time, you're just doing whatever you want. Why? Because if it's God's will, you'll get away with it. That's why. And he's just going to attack everybody for the rest of his life. And when he wins against all the big powers, he's going to start attacking the little people, which is going to be the Anabaptists and the Jews. Okay? Attack, murder. He's not going to get his hands dirty, nor is he ever going to face a realistic threat of being killed for his beliefs in his entire life. And neither is John Calvin. John Calvin is going to grow up to basically have a Taliban-like dictator state in Geneva, where he literally sends people around to measure your dress to make sure it's going down to your ankles. And it doesn't matter if you're in Switzerland and you don't want to get muddy snow on your dress. Well, you're going to wear a dress that goes down to your ankles, and you're going to get muddy snow on your dress, because if I see your ankles, I'm going to get a boner, and that can't happen. Because these guys are just full of the flesh. They have no Spirit of God working in them. It's just all legalism. Luther's going to ban musical instruments. Calvin's going to ban musical instruments from church, because he's going to say, well, that's the shadow, and the real, we don't need instruments. So we're all going to do a cappella hymnals now. Why do you think way back in the days of David they were using musical instruments to worship God, but somehow you're stuck with a hymnal? In your church, in your good old classic church, and they're teaching you that that's a good old fashioned conservative church, but these newfangled churches with their instruments, well, that's the devil. And that's why they're ruining everything. That came from John Calvin. The split in the Church of Christ over musical instruments did not come from the Church of Christ. It came from Calvin, because the Church of Christ came from the Presbyterians, and the Presbyterians came from Calvin. And that whole stupid idea of Calvinism about how musical instruments are just for the Old Testament, this is how dumb his ideas were. This guy was pulling stuff straight out of the Old Testament. Oh, you can't work on the Sunday Sabbath. Why? This is why Dutch Reformed people, I've literally heard people who've told me stories of how their Dutch Reformed neighbor sabotaged their lawnmower so they couldn't use it on Sunday. Literally cut the line on their lawnmower so it didn't work. So they needed a lawnmower repair so they couldn't use it on Sunday. This is evil. It's just evil Jewish legalism. And if these people had the numbers, they would start burning people at the stake again. They definitely burned me at the stake. And that's what they do to Michael Servetus. So Michael Servetus is he's going to be the founder of Unitarianism. Okay, Michael Servetus is going to basically be this guy, and it looks like he is a kind of a tool. He's kind of an obnoxious personality. He gets run out of Spain. He's like fighting with he somehow gets in a fist fight with whoever's at the school he's in Spain. He moves to France, gets French citizenship. And he has a combination of good ideas and bad ideas, but he is super just abrasive in how he delivers them. And so Michael Servetus is going to basically start attacking the Trinity. Now, if you've listened to me, I've attacked elements of Trinitarianism. I'm not attacking that the Father, Son, and the Spirit are all God and they're all one and they're three persons, okay? So if that's what Trinitarianism is, I'm all on board with it. Just stop using the word Trinity, because it comes from the Pythagorean triad. Okay? It's a stupid word. Don't use it. Okay? Just call it the Godhead or the divinity. Those are biblical words. Okay? But Michael Servetus is going to attack the idea that Jesus is God. Okay? He's going to say that Jesus is Lord, and he's going to say he's the Son of God, but he's going to say he's not God. He's just reviving the old Arian adoptionist theories and stuff like that came out of Orthodoxy. Okay? Those theories were around before Augustine. And these guys are like, no, we're reforming back to Augustine, but we don't want the Reformation to go back to the apostles. We're stopping at Augustine. Okay? That's what they're going to say. That's what Luther and Calvin are going to say. And everybody else is like, no, let's reform back to actual apostolic Christianity. So all the questions and all the debates between Augustine and the apostles have come out since the Reformation. Why? Because if we can reform from Roman Catholicism to Augustine, we can reform all the way back to the apostles. And in order to get there, we have to go through all the fights and all the debates that were ever there on the way to becoming Augustinian Christianity, because that's where Christendumb became thing. That's where infant baptism became law, and that's where being a fake Christian became the law of the land. And these guys know this. And what he has in common with the infant Baptist hating Anabaptists and the infant Baptist hating Lollards is that he hates infant baptism too. He also hates Augustinian predestination. But he's also going to be I guess the closest thing you could consider him to is an Arian, maybe an adoptionist. He's going to say that Jesus is the Son of God, but he's not. We don't have his writing. If somebody can find a copy of his writing, it's called The Restitution of Christianity. He is a restorationist. He is trying to restore original Christianity, and he thinks original Christianity didn't have the Trinity in it. Well, he's right about that. He's right about original Christianity not having the Trinity in it. He is trying to be a pure biblicist and say there's no word Trinity in the Bible, so therefore let's get rid of this, okay? But he's going to err, and he's going to err and say Jesus, listen, when he dies, his last words, when he's being burned alive with his books in Geneva, his last words are, Jesus, Son of the eternal God, have mercy on me. Okay, do you think he denied Christ? No, but he has a wrong idea about Christ. Okay, that's not what's going to get him condemned, because according to Scripture, that's not what the line is. The line is that Jesus is Lord and God raised him from the dead. You can be ignorant about the relationship between the Son and the Father and just not deny the Son and the Father. He's acknowledging the Son. He's acknowledging that he's Lord. He's acknowledging that God raised him from the dead. He's asking him to save him. Did Michael Servetus go to heaven? I believe he did. Did Calvin go to heaven? I'm on the fence about that, Maybe he did. I think he was genuinely born again, but he was a world-class idiot, okay? So why does John Calvin hate Michael Servetus so much? Because Michael Servetus attacked Calvin's institutes, okay? It's always about them, okay? I don't care if you're Athanasius or Augustine. I don't care who it is. The guy that they're attacking and they're getting condemned as a heretic is always somebody who started out critiquing them. That's where it starts. Arius critiqued Alexander of Alexandria. That's where it started. Pelagius critiqued Augustine. That's where it started. It always starts with these haughty, proud guys who get critiqued by somebody who's also wrong on some stuff, and they're both wrong on stuff. And instead of listening to them and going, well, maybe you're right on this, okay, and actually dialoguing with them and saying, well, okay, maybe we're both wrong. Maybe the truth is that you're right on that and I'm right on this, and somewhere in the middle is the truth, and it's in the Word, and we need to be at peace and love one another. Nope. I'm 100% right and you're 100% a heretic. Let's get you burned at the stake. And that's what Calvin's going to do. And so since this guy believes he's a Unitarian, he believes that Jesus is Lord and he's the Son of God and God raised him from the dead, but he doesn't believe he's fully God like Jesus is fully God. Okay? And so Calvin is not going to argue with him about infant baptism, but he's going to get burned at the stake for attacking infant baptism. He's going to get burned at the stake for attacking the Trinity and attacking infant baptism, both things. So he's going to get burned at the stake for one true thing and one false thing. That is officially documented. And Calvin, the way he does it, he entices him, it looks like. Okay, we don't have absolute proof that he does, but Calvin says about this guy, they want to get this guy to Geneva to kill him. Okay? They want to get him killed from Geneva, and he's in France. He only knows Calvin because he knew Calvin's teacher, which is this guy Acompopoulos. I'll show you. Johannes Acompopoulos, okay? This was the guy who taught Calvin right after he got saved. And he's a guy who knows Bucer, and he knows Zwingli, and he knows Erasmus, and he knows Luther, okay? And so this guy is kind of a blend of all those guys. He's still into Mariology, okay? And this is Calvin's teacher. And so that's how Calvin is going to learn to kind of bridge between these different positions and come up with a theology that's going to sell to all the different Reformed parties because his teacher knows them all, okay? So Calvin was well set up to be positioned for this, and within 3 years of knowing this guy, Calvin's going to publish his Institutes, even though he just got saved like literally the year he met this guy, okay? This is going to be the guy that first disciples Calvin, and then Calvin is going to get the credit for all these guys' works because he's basically going to publish this guy's works with his own tweaks and stuff like that into his Institutes. And he's going to come up with a less abrasive version of Augustinian Christianity to sell to everybody, okay? Michael Servetus knew this guy before Calvin did. And so eventually, Calvin's going to have friends who know this guy, and then they're going to start a correspondence. And Michael Servetus is going to write to Calvin, and he's going to start writing his ideas, and they're going back and forth, and it's cordial at first, okay? And then he is going to send Calvin a copy of a book he's writing called The Restoration of Christianity. And in that book, he's going to attack predestination, He's going to attack infant baptism, but he's also going to attack the Trinity. Now, I'm writing a book called Rightly Dividing that attacks those three things too, okay? I'm attacking the Trinity, okay? The Trinity is not some sacred cow that we need to worship, okay? Yes, we need to understand that the Father, the Son, and the Spirit are all God, and they're all one, and they're all three persons. That's it. That's it. We need to be able to say that. We don't need a word Trinity. We don't need the Nicene Council. We don't need homoousion. All of that is not of God. And in fact, it actually is definitely not of God. Okay? Well, Servetus is trying to do the same thing. Okay? He was not as... He didn't have access to all the information that I have, but he was probably similar to me. Okay? This guy is just like abrasive. He's willing to fight everybody just like Luther. The difference is he's not as politically tactful to appeal to German nationalism because he just got ran out of his own country for being like this. This guy is going to be a disciple of Erasmus. He's going to be friends with Erasmus. He's going to know all the same reformers that Luther and Calvin know. Okay? But he's not a nationalist. He's a man without a country, and he's trying to do this on principle, not on nationalism, like the Lutherans and the Calvinists are. Okay? And so he's going to get some things wrong, but nothing worthy of being burned at the stake. Okay? He is wrong on Jesus not being the Son of God, or not being fully God. But he's right on Jesus being Son of the God, Jesus being Lord, Jesus being raised from the dead, and Jesus being the way he gets saved. He is right on predestination to being saved being wrong. He is right on infant baptism being wrong. And Calvin is going to send him a copy of his Institutes in response to this guy's restitution of Christianity. Now imagine, you're writing back and forth to this theologian who you respect, okay? This is why I went to seminary. I want to interact with top minds in the field and see what they think, get their thoughts, let them challenge my thoughts. And these people are going to be like, nope, I'm not going to challenge your thoughts. I'm just going to hand you a book and say, read this book. And these guys are going to hand me a systematic theology. This is the exact thing that happened. They hand me a systematic theology, and I go, here's a quote from your book that says that Calvin said regeneration preceded faith just for infants to make infant baptism work, but faith preceded regeneration for that. And my professor is going to call that a fallacious argument. And I'm like, it's in the book you gave me. No, I'm going to mark your paper down for it. You don't care, do you? No, I don't. You're going to have to apologize. How dare you attack my integrity? You're going to have to apologize if you want to come back to class. F you. This is Michael Servetus. He's going to send back Calvin's Institutes all noted up and show him all his errors. Because he is not about this predestination crap. This guy is educated, he is smart, he is brilliant. He apparently made contributions to math and medicine that were colossal for his day. Like he mapped how the pulmonary system of the heart works, and he made colossal contributions to medicine. Okay? Calvin doesn't care. He critiqued Calvin's influences. He can't look at this guy as somebody who's like, okay, he's not one of us, but he's definitely not Satan. He's definitely not trying to start a massive following of his own. This is like, he's into science, he's into math, he's into all kinds of stuff, philosophy, and then he's also into theology. And he's going to write his opinion on theology because he's smart and opinionated. And this guy is going to say, I think this predestination crap and this infant baptism crap needs to go. And Calvin's going to be cordial with him until he sends back a Calvin's book to him with a bunch of critical notes in it. And Calvin's going to look at this and say, how dare you? I'm superior to you. You can't critique my work. I'm critiquing your work. And he basically responds to Calvin this way. Or Calvin responds to him this way. When he critiques Calvin's work, he's basically going to politely say, you are not worthy to critique my work, okay? He's going to reply to him by letter, I neither hate you nor despise you, nor do I wish to persecute you, but I would be as hard as iron when I behold you insulting sound doctrine with so great audacity. What Calvin is saying is, my institutes is perfect. If you think you're worthy to critique my institutes, you're going to have a problem. This is the same thing they say to me in seminary. You're not going to do well here if you don't, I forget what the word was, but it was just like adopt a position of humility or learning or whatever. Like basically just like, you're here to learn from us. We're not here to learn from you. Okay? Mind you, these are guys who are my age. They got PhDs. Okay, one's like a year older than me, one's 5 years younger than me. You don't teach us anything. You're here to be taught by us. Who the frick do you think you are? This is a guy who just imagines amillennialism to be true, or imagines regeneration to be in the Old Testament, or a guy who's talking about, the power of the magistrate to punish heretics. These are guys who are still stuck in this. If they were among these guys, they would have me burned at the stake, and they would not bat an eye, they would not shed a tear. They'd be like, good, God's will be done. Okay? This is how these people are, okay? You're not worthy to critique us. It's all about us critiquing you. You need to submit to us, and it's just all about pulling dominance through an artificial, fake condescension. Okay? Why? Because they don't have the power of Luther. It's all about rhetoric. It's all about persuading you that they're dominant, okay? And so what he's saying is, you're insulting sound doctrine. Is he going to get into specifics? Nope. Is he going to admit any fault in his writings? Nope. He's going to say, you're not worthy to treat with me, okay? That's his condescension. And then Servetus is going to keep contending with him by letter, and Calvin's just going to be like, silence, we're cut off now. And then Servetus is going to keep writing him, and Calvin's going to get pissed. So in 1546, this is like within like a few years of meeting this guy, okay? Calvin produces this in 1536. This guy is actually going to publish his book in 2 years after this, okay? But Calvin's going to get an early copy of this. So somewhere around this time, I don't know exactly when, Calvin's going to write to his friend and say, he critiqued my book. Servetus has sent me a long volume of his ravings, okay? He is talking about he sent him for review before he published. Okay, this is a guy with more humility than Calvin. I'm going to publish this book called The Restoration of Christianity. I want to know what you think. You're a leading theologian. I want to hear your critiques. And Calvin doesn't critique it. He doesn't critique it at all. He is too above you to critique your work. What he's going to do is just going to send you a copy of his book and say, read Perfect Theology. Okay? So that guy's going to critique Calvin's book. And he's going to say, here's where you're wrong, here's where you're wrong, here's where you're wrong, and there's going to be a lot of highlighter in it, okay? And Calvin's going to be pissed that he'd do this, and he's going to say, Servetus has just sent me a long volume of his ravings. If he consents to come here, or he's saying, if I consent, he will come here. In other words, he thinks we're friends. Michael Servetus thinks we're friends. He thinks we're just having a friendly debate, and we're going back and forth, and he thinks we're friends. If I consent, he will come here. But I will not give my word, for if he comes here, if my authority is worth anything, I will never permit him to depart alive. Okay? Michael Servetus thinks him and Calvin are on the same level. We disagree on things, but we're on the same level. We're both very smart guys. We're both into theology. I sent him a copy of my book before I published it because I wanted to know what he thought. He sent me a copy of his book in reply, and he didn't send me a critical copy of my book. He didn't, point out exactly where I'm wrong with these things. He didn't interact with them at all. He just sent me a copy of his book. So I critiqued his book because I consider us equals. Just because he's got a little cult going on in Geneva, I don't consider him like a superior man to me. I'm a French citizen. He's a French citizen. He's in Geneva. I'm from Spain, but now I'm a French citizen. And he's basically, he was chased out of France for his views. I was chased out of Spain for my views. We're very similar. He's going to look at Calvin as a kindred spirit. Like, yeah, we should be friends, right? We were both friends of this Acabandius guy. We're similar. We're similar reformers, right? And he's going to appeal to Calvin for critique. And Calvin's going to be like, here's my book, learn good theology. And Calvin is going to appeal to him like an inferior. and he's going to critique Calvin to show I'm not inferior to you. Here's where you're wrong. And Calvin's going to be like, how dare you not think you're inferior to me? If you ever come to Geneva, I'm going to murder you. Okay? This is what Calvin does. So what Calvin is going to do, he's going to have friends in France rat this guy out to the Inquisition to get this guy inquisitioned. And he's going to get his friend Guillaume de Trie, a rich merchant who had taken refuge in Geneva. Now he's back in France. He's going to send a letter to this guy Antoine Arnis, who is living in Lyon. And next thing you know, the French Inquisitor is going to start questioning Michael Servetus and one of his friends. Okay? Do you guys believe this? Are you against the Trinity? Are you against blah, blah, blah? Now remember, the Calvinist Huguenots are already getting persecuted in France. Well, I'm sorry, the Huguenots might not be Calvinists yet. The Huguenots adopt Calvinism later on. Okay? And then they get permission to have whatever, legal peace in France. And I think that's because the French are still using Swiss mercenaries, and a lot of them are Calvinists now. I think that's what happens. Because you're going to find the Lutherans, the English, and the Swiss are going to use the Catholic French against the Catholic Roman Catholic Holy Roman Empire to win their side. These guys are never gonna win without betraying people. And so they'll side with Catholics, they'll side with Ottomans, they'll side with Russian Orthodox, they'll side with whoever it is to win and advance their cause, because it's all about might and political power. It's not about faith, okay? So anyways, Calvin's friends are going to get this guy inquisitioned. And that inquisition is going to burn him as a heretic, or they're going to try to, okay? And it's basically Calvin, and it's the guy who's now printing his book. Remember, it starts coming out in 1548, so this is 1553. So he starts printing his book, and they're going to get him, they're going to call the Catholic Inquisition on him. And these guys are going to do exactly what the Calvinists do, which is just lie about your true beliefs. And they're going to do that, and they're going to say, no, we don't believe any of that, whatever the accusations are. And because they have no evidence, they're going to leave him alone. And then this inquisitor is going to go back to Calvin's friends and say, where is your proof that this guy is a heretic? Okay? And they're going to go to Calvin, and Calvin is going to deliver his entire correspondence with Michael Servetus, highlighting everything. Now, he's not going to do this to Servetus. Servetus is beneath him. He's not going to go to Servetus and say, here's where you're wrong. I'm going to highlight where you're wrong. But he will do it to the French Inquisition to get him killed. And so Calvin's going to try to get him killed by sending all the evidence they need to condemn him and burn him as a heretic in France. Okay? This is what Calvin does. Then Servetus is going to get, and his friend are going to get locked up in a French prison, and they're going to get killed. Okay? But they break out of prison. Now, for some reason or another, I don't know if he just doesn't know that Calvin's the one who got him inquisitioned. I don't know. But he goes to Geneva after this. Remember, Calvin has told other people that he won't let him leave here alive. Calvin has never threatened him directly. Never called him a heretic directly. He's never condemned him directly. He's only done it to other people and through other people. And he's told people that if he ever comes to Geneva, he'll never leave here alive. Okay? Now, I don't know if he comes to Geneva on his own because he thinks Calvin would protect him. But based on the evidence that I have in front of me, Calvin is telling him, the last correspondence he got from Calvin was, I don't hate you and I don't wish to persecute you. Okay? But you're wrong. But you're wrong, okay? That's his correspondence he got from Calvinism, is I don't hate you and I don't wish to persecute you. But Calvin's writing people to his friends that if he comes here, I'm going to get this guy killed. And then he's helping other friends try to get him killed. Okay? So he comes to Geneva because he is a reformer and he is being persecuted by Catholics. He doesn't know that these are Calvinists that are setting him up to be persecuted by the Catholics. And so he goes to a place that a lot of people go to when they're being persecuted by Catholics in England and in France and in Germany. They go to Switzerland because it's a place full of mercenaries and it's safe. Okay? And so he goes to Geneva. It looks like he goes to Geneva thinking he's going to be safe there because Calvin says he's not going to persecute him. And then he gets there, and Calvin does not attack him directly. He takes no part in it because there is a law in Switzerland that says if you accuse somebody of a capital crime, which is going to get them killed, you need to be put in jail as well until this case is resolved. In other words, you're the collateral. Remember, their life's on the line. You don't get to say, that guy deserves to die. I'm witness to that. And so lock him up until trial, but I'm just going to sit here free. You have to go to jail too. You're both going to go to jail, and one of you is going to come out dead because you've accused somebody of something that's worthy of death. Okay? That's the law. So Calvin's not going to do this himself. He's going to have one of his friends do it, one of his minions do it. Okay? And his minion friend is going to, remember, this is, so that's the lex talionis. That's why he can't do this. So his minion friend Nicholas is going to summon him on the capital charge, and Calvin is going to basically put all the argumentation against him, and basically they're going to attack dog this guy. Okay? Now this is what they're going to do to him. This is how cruel these people are. Oh, you're not married. You must be gay. He's literally sitting here going, I actually had a really bad hernia years ago, and I couldn't perform marital duties anyways. So that's why I'm not married. Okay? And they're going to accuse him of saying, oh, you're saying that the demons are gods too. No, Paul is saying that actually in 1 Corinthians, but we're going to get all our Catholic friends to say, he's making the demons equal to God. No, he's actually using the word Elohim, how the Bible uses it to relate to demons, and how Paul uses the word gods when he says there are gods many and lords many, but we know that there's one God. Okay, so he's using the language of the Bible in the biblical way, and they're going to say, you're saying that there's many gods, that the individual devils are gods, and he's like, no, they're called gods, they're called Elohim. Okay. You're saying that the devils possess divinity. No, because they're called sons of God in the Bible, okay? And they're saying that there is much deity as Christ. And what he is saying is he's basically posing probably Originian Arminianism or Arianism. It's not called Arianism, but he's the idea that Jesus is an Elohim, like the other 8 sons of God are Elohim. And Jesus is the firstborn, and he's number 1. But he is not indistinct from the other angels. There's probably something like Arianism, but he's saying that he's not God like God's God, okay? That he's the Son of God. Okay, this is a common error that's been around since the 2nd century, okay? It's just been squashed out in Trinitarian Christendom, okay? And so they're going to say that means that you're saying that Jesus is equal to the deities of wood and stone. Well, if you know your Bible, you know he's just quoting 1 Corinthians. All this stuff that they're saying against him could come straight out of an actual exegetical reading of 1 Corinthians. Okay, and they're calling him gay, based on no evidence, and then they're calling him basically comparing Jesus to wood and stone idols, based on how they're interpreting his interpretation of 1 Corinthians. And then he's going to say, so this is what Calvin is writing to his friends. I hope that the sentence of death will at least be passed on him, but I desire that the severity of the punishment be mitigated. In other words, he wants him to get beheaded instead of burned alive because he wants him gone because he dared to critique Calvin's institutes and predestination and infant baptism. But he knows this guy is sincere. Calvin knows he's sincere. And so he doesn't want him to suffer being burned at the stake. He just wants him silenced forever. Okay? This is how these guys think. Calvin knows if he kills this guy, he's going to go to heaven. The reason they burned you at the stake is because they believe you're going to hell. That's why they're just like, we're starting the process right now. You're going to keep burning after this. you're going to hell, so we're going to burn you alive. Okay? That's why they burn you at the stake. And Calvin's saying, I don't want him burned at the stake, I want him beheaded. Why? Because Calvin knows he's going to go to heaven. Calvin knows this guy's born again. He's wrong, but he's born again. But he called me wrong, and that's where he needs to just die. Okay? So, this is the legal rights they actually had over Servetus. He is not a citizen of Geneva. They have no right to prosecute him like this. The worst thing they could do to him, under their authority, is to banish him. And if they wanted to diplomatically send him back to France and get him execution in France, they could do that under the Roman Catholic Inquisition. Okay? They have no right or authority to do this, but they decide to judge him under the Swiss Reform cantons as if he's a Swiss reformer, as if he's a citizen of their state. Okay? And this is just illegal. This is just what they're doing is an illegal murder. They have no jurisdictional right to do what they're doing. Okay? He is a citizen of France, and they're going to murder him. Okay? And they're going to get Martin Luther doesn't like him, Philip Melanchthon doesn't like him, Calvin doesn't like him. There you go. That's everything. Now Luther's already dead, but he knew Luther from back in the day. Okay. Even the libertines, which the libertines hate all the Calvinist legalism that's going on, they don't like him. Why? Because we're all good Trinitarians and we spoke against the Trinity. Okay? We all believe in Nicaea, we just don't believe in Christendom, or Roman Catholic Christendom at least. And they're going to burn him at the stake for 2 charges. Okay? Denying the Trinity and infant baptism. Those are the charges that they burn him at the stake for. They're going to burn him on a pile of his own books, and his last words as he's being burned alive are, Jesus, Son of the eternal God, have mercy on me. Boy, he sounds like a devil. This guy was so absorbed in science and philosophy and medicine and all this other stuff, if they had just left him alone, he would have written his book. He wasn't trying to start a movement around himself. He wasn't trying to start a denomination. He was speaking his thoughts freely as to the Reformation, and he was adding his 2 cents. That's all he was doing, okay? And they murdered him for it. Why? Because they're murderers. Because Satan was a murderer from the beginning, okay? These are mercenaries. They kill for money, okay? So this guy... This is Sebastian Castillo. He was one of the guys who were around. He was a French preacher there. And a number of other people hate what they did. And because they hate what they did, they start reading his book. Who's this guy that these guys had burned at the stake? This French citizen that the people of Geneva kidnapped and had burned at the stake. Oh, he wrote this book. That's the reason they had him burned at the stake. They need to publicly declare why they had him burned at the stake, because they murdered him. They murdered a French citizen. And so, who is this guy? Well, let's read his book and find out. And they start reading his book, and he has a lot of reasonable ideas in it. And that becomes the Unitarian Church. There wouldn't have been a Unitarian Church because this guy Servetus was not famous. They made him famous. He was a guy, listen, he was not well liked among the reformers, but he was well liked among the scientific community. And if literally they just critiqued his book and left him alone and said, here's your book, you're wrong on this and this and this, and left him alone, there would have never been a Unitarian movement. There would have literally just been like, okay, well, he's wrong. We don't like this, we don't like this, and they're going to go back and forth. And the worst thing that would have happened is he would have influenced people against predestination and infant baptism, which the Lutherans and the Calvinists were 100% for. And they're fully willing to turn this guy over to the Catholics and have him killed to defend infant baptism and predestination, which it seems like that's what Calvin was mad about. It wasn't his Trinitarianism that Calvin was mad about. It was his assaults on Calvin's institutes that he was mad about. And so Sebastian Castillo and other discerning people, just like with Arius, just like with Pelagius, just like with every other movement where these power brokers and these manipulative politicians get somebody killed or condemned when they're wrong on things too, they're not going to like this. They're going to denounce his execution. They're going to become harsh critics of Calvin. These guys are going to get chased out of Switzerland and go to Poland, and there found the Unitarian Church. And other people are going to read his stuff, and there's going to be more and more anti-Trinitarians coming out, and that's where you're going to get Unitarian Universalism from, eventually. So this movement starts in Poland and Transylvania, okay? Where Dracula is from. And the Polish Brethren are going to separate from the Calvinist Reformed Church in Poland and lay the foundations of the Unitarian Church, okay, on Michael Servetus' stuff. Because they look at Calvin as a dick. We don't want to be called Calvinists. Calvin was awful. He's an awful human being. And they're going to, well, who's the leading theologian who... remember, the Anabaptists are getting murdered all over the place, and they're going to end up in places like Poland and, Poland's Catholic, so they're going to get persecuted there, but like Russia. So other Slavic countries are taking them in because they're good, hard workers. They become the Amish. They'll work your farms and stuff like that. They just don't want to die, but they're going to spread the gospel, and they're going to lead to German pietism, and all the Moravians and the Moravians are going to lead to the holiness movement. That's going to come out of the Moravians. Okay, the missionary movements to Africa are going to come out of the Moravians. Those are the Anabaptists they killed. Okay, people think the Amish are a bunch of legalistic people who are spiritually irrelevant, and they don't realize that the Amish and the Mennonites were murdered all over Europe until they had to form communities where they were self-reliant and farmed and didn't need to rely on the outside world. Why? Because the outside world was killing them. That's why the Amish and Mennonites are the way they are. And they're not super legalistic. They are legalistic, but they actually tell their people, go off into the world and decide if you want to be a part of that, and if not, then you come back to the community and be one of us. But they're going to practice shunning, which is biblical church discipline, and they're going to tell you, like, this is how we do it. And you know what? They're gonna send their Amish kids off into the world, and most of them are gonna come back and say, you know what? It's a cesspool out there. And most of them are gonna freely come back and become Amish. Okay? They have more trust in God than these Lutherans and these Calvinists who baptize their kids as infants and try to beat them over the head with it for their whole life until they chase all Christianity out of Europe. The Amish are just going to be isolated. But you know what? This is a fact. I want you guys to hear this. This is a fact. There are more Amish people in America than there are Presbyterians. With all their manipulations, with all their infiltrating other churches, there's more Amish in America than there are Presbyterians. Wrap your minds around that. Calvinism kills Christianity wherever it goes. Lutheranism kills Christianity wherever it goes. But you only have Lutheranism among Scandinavians and Germans anyways. Okay? It's a purely nationalist religion. But Calvinism infiltrates other churches and lies, but it kills them wherever it goes. It killed Christianity in England. It killed Christianity in the Netherlands. It killed Christianity in Switzerland. It killed Christianity wherever it went, and so did Lutheranism. And now they're here in America being together for the gospel so they can kill Christianity here too. They will kill your church. I promise you. Might not happen overnight, but they will kill your church spiritually. Okay? That's why they need to infiltrate their church. They've already killed all their churches. That's why all your Reformed and all your Lutheran churches had liberal splits where they have gay women clergy now. And now the conservatives needed to part with them, and they did part with them, but then their churches died because all their youth left because it kills Christianity, and they have this money, but their churches are dying. That's why I was a part of a church that was just literally like 100 and 300 old gray-head Reformed people, and then that church died. Why? Because the Reformed church across town decided to start using musical instruments and grow their church a bit. And they did grow their church a bit. And then that church died. And then that church basically got sold to charismatics, and then the other one got sold to the charismatic church that I was a part of. That's where both of their churches went. This was Sunshine Community Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the largest Reformed church in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is Reformed metropolis, okay? The largest one, Sunshine Community Church, died. Couldn't keep the doors open. Why? Because all the money left, and that money went and formed the church that was bought by Carpenter's House Outreach Ministries because it died. Because they couldn't produce any converts, and these guys couldn't produce any money because the Dutch are cheap. This is what a joke Reformed Christianity is, okay? And Sunshine Community Church was one of the biggest churches in Grand Rapids, and it started hosting rock concerts and stuff like that. I actually went and saw Bethel, or what is it called? What's Bethel's music group called? I went and saw them at Sunshine Community Church, the Reformed Church. That's where they were before they died. They were hosting Bethel music in their church. Or Jesus Culture. That's what it was. They were hosting the Jesus Culture band in their church before they died. And then that church got bought by the brother of the guy who started telling me I had demons and all this stuff for calling out like all the just just the anti-eschatology stuff that's going on. Okay? So the brother of that guy ran First Assembly, or not First Assembly. It was called People's Church, Resurrection Life in Rockford, Michigan, and he that's just a rich give me money tithe church. And that guy, who's a scoundrel and a criminal, he goes and buys Sunshine Community Church because the church has they're so flush with cash. Because charismatics give rich to grow rich. They believe in think and grow rich stuff, okay? And so they're going to keep throwing their money at charismatic pastors because they think they're going to get richer from it, okay? And then so they buy Sunshine Community Church. Meanwhile, their church is a train wreck, okay? This is Michigan, okay? This is Michigan where you have your Catholics and your Baptists and your Charismatics and your Lutherans and your Reformed Baptists, and they're all there, but at the heart of it is the Dutch Reformed, Amway making, Blackwater making, Van Andels, DeVosses, those people, Dutch Reformed, all over it. And they kill Christianity wherever they go. And so now all the Reformed churches in Grand Rapids are small. And so what are they doing? Well, they're joining the Reformed infiltrate stealth Calvinist movement and lie about being Reformed. That's what they're doing now. They're infiltrating Baptist churches. They've been doing this not for decades, for centuries. Okay? But when they try to start a church that is openly Reformed or openly Presbyterian, it dies every single time. Because once people figure out what they really believe, there's no gospel in it. There's nothing to evangelize. What are you going to tell people? You don't have a free will. Hopefully God picked you. That's good news. Maybe for someone. How's that good news for me? I frickin' don't know. I don't logic. But believe in Jesus or you're going to go to hell. Your God's a dick, dude. I'm not going to do that. And this is what these guys are going to, this is what it's going to be. They're going to do this all over the world. Everywhere. And now they're just doing it by stealth. Trust me. Trust me. Trust me. Trust me when I tell you this. Once they get control of the churches in America, they're going to convince you. Rebranding and renaming Calvinism is something they've been doing in the beginning, okay? For one, it started out as Zwingli's Reformed Christianity, okay? Then it became Calvinism when Calvin became more popular than Luther, and they started spreading it everywhere in Europe, okay? Now they rebranded it after the evangelical movement came out of the Great Awakening as an affront to Calvinism. They started rebranding it as evangelicalism, okay? Now they're rebranding it as non-denominational Christianity and evangelical Christianity. They keep calling it something different because the Reformation started out with Catholics. Okay? And they called their movement Reformed to suck in all those Reformed Catholics. But when those Reformed Catholics were Aristotelian and anti-Augustinian, they didn't like that. And so Calvinism basically claimed the name Reformed from them and said, we're the Reformation because we're Augustinian. And then they called their theology Reformed theology as if they fixed everything. And it was a joke. And then they brought it to England, and they called it Puritanism. And then they brought it to America, and then they called it Congregationalism and Puritanism. And then they infiltrated the Baptists, and they called it Baptist theology, particular Baptists, but they're just Calvinists. And they just infiltrate and destroy, infiltrate and destroy, infiltrate and destroy, because they can't, they're anti-evangelical movements. All they know how to do is infiltrate other churches and destroy them, or manipulate governments to get the government to force Calvinism on people. That's all they've ever done. But when it comes down to evangelism, it's a lying fest. They're going to lie. Oh, I'm not a Calvinist. Until you're saved, then we're going to make you a Calvinist. This is what I heard from a Calvinist worship leader at a church I was at. He said, oh yeah, evangelize like an Arminian. They're liars. They're just liars, okay? So, how did this all start? Well, because Martin Luther was the worst and Calvin was the worst. They're just the worst people. But they wrote very thick books about the Bible. They must be full of the Spirit of God. Or they're not. Or they're full of the devil, and the devil knows how to write thick books because he writes thick books too. Because this is not an exclusive power that you need the Holy Spirit to do. What's in the books? Are they garbage? Do they glorify God? Or are they just attacking everything just to say that this is what's right, and then what they're saying can't even be lined up with the Bible if you know how to use logic? And the answer is that's what they do. They destroy everything. They attacked everything that tried to get closer to the Bible than they were. Everything. Whether it was Catholic Reformed, Anabaptists, Lollards, Hussites, they betray them. I'm going to talk about the betrayal of the Hussites once I study that more. But the Hussites were a 100-year movement in what's now called Czechia, okay, the Czech Republic. And they destroy it. They destroy it. They destroy this free state of anti-Catholic Reformed Hussites. The guy who inspired Martin Luther, he betrays that movement. Okay? I'm going to talk about that in another video. But you guys listen to this again. Remember, they're the worst. The worst, you guys. And once you understand that they're the worst, you will try to be better than that. Okay? Just stick to the Bible. Get rid of anything that doesn't come from the Bible. Get rid of language. Get rid of arguments. Get rid of logic. Get rid of terms and themes that don't come from the Bible. Just throw them out and just learn your Bible, okay? You will not end up being like Michael Servetus if you coordinate the whole Bible together. But if you don't add anything to the Bible, that is something that we can take from Michael Servetus. He didn't like stuff that didn't come from the Bible. And he came against the Trinity because the Trinity didn't come from the Bible. It came from Greek philosophy. Okay? He overstepped and they murdered him for it. So, hope you guys understand Michael Servetus was a better person than Calvin. Michael Servetus was a better person than Calvin. Michael Servetus was a better person than Calvin. Batman out. Peace.
The world